coast to coast. What matters, when it matters. This is today's talk. Your world, your news, right now.
Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's face it, keeping track of everything happening in the world, it feels like, well, a full-time job, doesn't it?
It really does. Information overload is real.
Exactly. So we've done some digging for you, looked through the major headlines from the last day or so, mostly the New York Times and the BBC, to give you a clearer picture, a quick briefing, but hopefully insightful.
And we approach it slightly differently. I tend to be, let's say, the resident skeptic, always asking, what's really going on here?
And I try to find the, well, maybe not always bright side, but perhaps the interesting angle, the potential connections. So between us, you should get a pretty balanced view.
That's the plan. A relaxed, accessible look at some complex stuff.
All right, let's dive in. First up, U.S.-China relations. It feels like that's always simmering, but there's a new angle.
Yeah, it seems to be getting trickier. The New York Times is flagging this concern that students and even tourists might become sort of bargaining chips in the ongoing trade tensions.
Bargaining chips? Wow. Like how?
Well, things like sudden travel warnings, maybe visas getting revoked. It shows how these big economic fights can, start to affect individuals just trying to travel or study. It's a personal impact from a geopolitical game.
That is unsettling. Imagine planning a trip or heading off to university and getting caught in the middle.
Mm-hmm. And it ties into the bigger economic picture, too. The BBC mentioned the World Trade Organization is putting out warnings. They're saying these U.S. tariffs, they're actually likely to make global trade shrink.
Shrink. That sounds counterproductive for everyone involved, doesn't it? Less trade usually means less growth.
Precisely. Tariffs are basically taxes on imports, makes things more expensive, disrupts supply chains. The WTO sees it as a drag on the global economy. So the question becomes, is this friction a necessary strategy for, say, national interests? Or is it an escalation that ends up hurting everybody?
A question with no easy answer, I suspect. Okay, let's shift focus. And this next topic is incredibly difficult. The situation in Gaza.
Yes. The New York Times published an account from Keith Siegel. He was held hostage for, I think, 484 days.
484 days. Just staggering.
And his description of the ordeal, the physical side, the psychological toll, it's just harrowing. It really brings home the immense human cost of this conflict.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, it sounds like things aren't getting any better on the ground.
No. The Times also reported that Israel is threatening further escalation in the war. Meanwhile, the UN is sounding the alarm louder than ever about the humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
They're talking about a real risk of famine.
And the BBC added another layer to that, didn't they? Something about Israeli troops staying.
That's right. An Israeli minister apparently stated that troops will remain in specific security zones inside Gaza even after the war ends.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, the 6-week blockade on supplies that continues.
Despite the UN calling the consequences potentially devastating.
Despite those warnings, yes. It highlights this stark clash between stated security aims and the undeniable humanitarian fallout. It feels like a cycle that's just incredibly hard to break.
Yeah, a really painful cycle. Are there any signs, any shifts at all that might offer, I don't know, some hope for de-escalation, or is it just locked in this pattern?
That's the crucial question, isn't it?
Yeah.
From these reports, it feels very much locked in, but situations can change quickly. For now, though, it looks grim.
Okay. Let's move across the map a bit. The UK, there's been a court ruling getting attention.
Yes, the UK Supreme Court ruled on how woman is defined under their Equality Act. The New York Times reports the court said it refers to biological sex.
And that's significant for
trans rights activists. Primarily.
Mm-hmm.
They're understandably disappointed. It brings that whole debate about legal definitions versus gender identity right back to the forefront.
Right. Okay. And sticking with Europe, but shifting eastward, security concerns seem high in the Baltics.
Very high. Latvia has decided to pull out of the Landmine Convention. That's according to the NYT. And it's not just Latvia, Poland, and other Baltic states apparently agreed. The stated reason is fear of Russian aggression, explicitly linking it to the invasion of Ukraine. It's a big deal because the Landmine Convention aims to ban anti-personnel mines completely.
So they feel they might need those mines for defense against Russia.
That seems to be the implication. It shows how the Ukraine war is causing nations to rethink, long-held international agreements and security postures. A worrying sign.
Definitely worrying. Moving continents again, Sudan is in the news, and it sounds dire.
Extremely dire. The paramilitary group, the RSF Rapid Support Forces, they've declared a sort of parallel government.
While attacking civilians.
Exactly. Amidst an assault on the Zamzam camp for displaced people in Darfur. The UN, via the New York Times, is reporting at least 300 deaths just there. It's catastrophic.
Declaring a parallel government in that context just fuels the fire, presumably.
It absolutely does. It complicates any potential peace efforts and likely means more suffering for civilians caught in the middle.
And another worrying trend pressure on journalists?
Yes. The New York Times highlighted concerns for journalists working for Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty. Some are already imprisoned in certain countries.
And now there are efforts to shut the whole outlet down.
That appears to be the case. It's concerning because ARC-NRL has historically provided independent news in places where press freedom is severely limited. Targeting them feels like another step in restricting information flow.
Yeah, a free press is so fundamental. Okay, let's look at some international politics and justice issues. Italy's Prime Minister Meloni meeting with Trump.
That's right. The NYT noted this upcoming meeting. And the potential implications for Europe are interesting, especially, looping back to those trade tensions we started with.
How might that play out?
Well, depending on the discussions and potential future U.S. policy shifts, if Trump were reelected, it could affect transatlantic trade, NATO dynamics. It's definitely one to watch. Meloni's positioning here is significant.
Okay. And in Peru, some high-profile sentencing.
Yes. BBC reported that Peru's former president and first lady both received 15-year prison sentences.
For what?
Taking illegal campaign contributions. It's a major verdict. Really underscores the idea that eventually accountability can happen even at the highest levels.
A strong message against corruption, then.
Hopefully. Though these things often take a very long time.
True. And then there's a really disturbing case out of Germany.
Yeah, this one is quite chilling. The BBC reported a German doctor has been charged with murdering 15 patients.
15? That's horrific.
It is. And the accusation includes arson, setting fire to their homes, possibly to cover his tracks. It's just an unimaginable breach of trust.
Absolutely awful. Shifting gears a bit, some, let's call them unexpected or developing stories. There's something about deportation flights to El Salvador.
Right. A U.S. judge, according to the BBC, has basically warned the Trump administration, regarding actions taken during the Trump administration, that they could be held in contempt of court over deportation flights.
Why contempt?
The judge cited willful disregard for a previous ruling that had blocked those specific deportations to El Salvador.
Okay, and this connects to another story.
It does. The New York Times had a piece saying experts believe El Salvador's President Bukele could return a man who was apparently deported from the U.S. by mistake, but that he likely lacks the interest or motivation to do so.
So you have a legal ruling being disregarded, potentially, and then the receiving country may be unwilling to correct an error. What a mess.
It really highlights the complexities, the potential gaps, and frankly, the human consequences within immigration systems.
Yeah. And speaking of migration, the EU is trying to speed things up.
The BBC reports the EU plans to fast-track migrant returns by designating 7 countries as safe.
Which countries?
Let's see, Kosovo, Bangladesh, Colombia, Egypt, India, Morocco, and Tunisia. The idea is to expedite the process for people arriving from these places.
But that's always controversial, isn't it? Designating a whole country as safe.
Highly controversial. It touches on huge debates about asylum rights, individual circumstances versus blanket policies, and of course, the actual conditions in those countries.
Right. Okay. We also had some sad news from the entertainment world.
Yes. The BBC reported the passing of actress Michelle Trachtenberg, known for shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, due to complications from diabetes.
Oh, that's very sad. Quite young.
Yes. And also, a slightly older piece of news, but reported recently by the BBC, the bodies of actor Gene Hackman and his wife were discovered back in February. They had apparently died of natural causes, about a week apart.
Wow. Gene Hackman. A true legend. Sad news on both counts.
Indeed. Moments that remind you of life's fragility.
Okay, on a completely different note, migrating elk.
Huh. Yes, apparently millions of people have been watching the annual migration of Swedish elk online. The BBC says it's become a bit of an internet phenomenon over the last 6 years.
Millions watching elk walk. That's amazing.
Maybe it's a bit of escapism? A dose of nature amidst all the other news we've been discussing.
Could be. I kind of want to look it up now. Another story involving immigration, but with a twist.
Right. This is also from the BBC. A detained activist in the U.S., a former protest leader named Mohsen Maldawi, he suspects his immigration interview was actually a setup.
A trap? How so?
He went for a scheduled appointment in Vermont and was arrested there. It raises questions about, the line between immigration enforcement and potentially targeting political dissenters.
That definitely sounds like something needing closer examination.
For sure. Due process is key there.
And finally, something about rare earths in Brazil.
Yes. The New York Times had a piece on a rare earths mine in Brazil that has American investment.
Why is that significant?
Well, it highlights the ongoing global scramble for these minerals, which are absolutely crucial for, everything from smartphones to electric vehicles to defense technology. And more importantly, it underscores how dominant China currently is in controlling the supply of these minerals.
So this mine in Brazil is an attempt to diversify, to find sources outside of China.
Exactly. It's part of a much larger geopolitical and economic strategy playing out globally. A really key area to watch.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. From global trade shifts and heartbreaking conflicts to migrating elk and rare earth minerals.
It really shows how interconnected everything is, doesn't it? Economic policy affects individuals, conflicts ripple outwards, even seemingly small stories can point to bigger trends.
It does. And it brings back that challenge of navigating all this information. We see the official reports, the warnings, the human stories.
And the different perspectives, the optimism versus the skepticism we talked about. It's a constant balancing act to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
As you go through your day, it's worth thinking about how these threads might weave together in ways we don't immediately see.
That's a great point. It leaves me wondering, with so many narratives competing for attention, how do we figure out which stories truly give us the understanding we need for what's happening now and what might come next? Definitely something to mull over.
Indeed.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it gave you some useful context for the day's news.